October 15th, 1948. 6:47 in the evening. Bumpy Johnson's apartment on Edgecombe Avenue in Harlem. Mamie was setting the table for dinner. She had made Bumpy's favorite meal. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, sweet potato pie waiting in the kitchen. But Bumpy wasn't hungry. He stood at the window looking south toward Midtown Manhattan, watching the lights come on in buildings where he couldn't eat, couldn't sit, couldn't exist as a paying customer. Mamie knew that look. She had been married to Bumpy for just 6 months, but she already knew when something was brewing in his mind. "What's wrong?" Bumpy turned from the window. His voice was quiet, controlled. "I'm tired, Mamie." "Tired of what?" "Tired of being told where I can and can't go in my own city. I've got money in my pocket. I dress better than most white men in this city. I can afford anything on any menu. But I can't walk into the Plaza Hotel and order dinner." Mamie put down the plate she was holding. "Bumpy, you're not thinking about. I am. I'm going downtown tonight, to the Plaza restaurant. I'm going to sit down and order dinner." Mamie's stomach dropped. The Plaza Hotel was one of the most exclusive establishments in New York City, located at 5th Avenue and Central Park South. Opened in 1907. French Renaissance architecture, marble, crystal chandeliers, the playground of millionaires and celebrities, and absolutely not a place where black people were welcome except as kitchen staff. "Bumpy, that's not a good idea." He looked at her steadily. "Why not?" "I've got the money. I can afford their prices. Because they won't serve you. And you know what might happen." Bumpy walked to the closet, pulled out his best suit, gray 3-piece, perfectly tailored. He laid it on the bed alongside his gold watch and chain, his black fedora. "I know exactly what might happen, Mamie. That's why I'm bringing witnesses." Within 20 minutes, 4 cars pulled up outside Bumpy's building. Nat Pettigrew stepped out of the first car, Sonny Chance from the second, Junie Bird from the third, and 8 other men from Bumpy's circle, all dressed in their finest suits, all understanding what they were about to do. This wasn't about dinner. This was about dignity. This was about showing white Manhattan that Harlem's most powerful man wouldn't accept second-class citizenship. Not anymore. To understand what Bumpy was doing, you need to understand New York in 1948. 3 years after the Ives-Coin Act, that law passed in March of 1945, signed by Governor Thomas Dewey. It was the first state-level anti-discrimination law in the entire United States. Groundbreaking legislation, revolutionary for its time. Assemblyman Irving Ives and Senator Elmer Quinn had championed it. The NAACP had fought for it. Thurgood Marshall had supported it. And when it passed, it made national news. But here's what most people didn't understand about the Ives-Coin Act. It only covered employment discrimination. It prohibited employers from refusing to hire someone based on race, creed, color, or national origin. That was huge. That was progress. But it didn't cover restaurants. It didn't cover hotels. It didn't cover theaters or shops or any other public accommodation. Those protections wouldn't come until 1952. So in 1948, the Plaza Hotel could legally refuse to serve Bumpy Johnson. They could turn him away at the door, call the police, have him arrested for trespassing, and face 0 legal consequences. That's the world Bumpy was walking into. But Bumpy also understood something else. Laws change when people force them to change. And sometimes forcing change means putting yourself in danger, means standing in a place you're not wanted, means making people uncomfortable, means risking arrest or worse. That's what civil rights movements are built on. Not polite requests, not patient waiting, but direct action, confrontation, making the invisible visible. So when Bumpy Johnson walked into the Plaza Hotel on October 15th, 1948, he wasn't just trying to get dinner. He was starting a fight that would take 4 years to win in the state legislature. But it started with 13 black men walking through the doors of the most exclusive restaurant in New York City. 7:23 in the evening. 4 black Cadillacs pulled up in front of the Plaza Hotel at 5th Avenue and 58th Street. Bumpy stepped out first. Gray suit, gold watch chain, black fedora, walking with the confidence of a man who belonged everywhere. Behind him came Nat Pettigrew, then Sonny Chance, then Junie Bird, then 9 more men, all impeccably dressed, all moving with purpose. The doorman at the plaza was a white man named Thomas McCarthy. 54 years old, worked at the hotel for 16 years. He'd seen wealthy guests from around the world, European nobility, Hollywood stars, political leaders, but he'd never seen a group of well-dressed black men approach the entrance. Not like this. Not with this kind of intention. McCarthy stepped forward. His voice was polite but firm. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid." Bumpy smiled. "Good evening. We have reservations." McCarthy blinked. "You have what?" "Reservations. For dinner. At the Plaza restaurant." McCarthy's mind raced. The Plaza didn't take reservations from black guests. That was understood. Unspoken. Part of the natural order of things. But this man was claiming he had reservations. McCarthy made a quick decision. "Let me check with management. Please wait here." But Bumpy was already walking past him, through the revolving doors, into the gilded lobby of the Plaza Hotel. McCarthy stood frozen. He should stop them, call security. But something about the way these men moved, the way they carried themselves, the absolute certainty in their stride, it made him hesitate. And in that hesitation, Bumpy Johnson and 12 other black men walked into the Plaza Hotel lobby, past the marble columns, past the crystal chandeliers, past the shocked faces of white guests, heading directly toward the Plaza restaurant. The restaurant was located just off the main lobby, formerly known as the Fifth Avenue Cafe in earlier years, now called the Plaza Restaurant. It would be renamed the Edwardian Room in 1955. But in 1948, it was simply the Plaza's main dining room. White tablecloths, silver cutlery, waiters in formal attire, an exclusively white clientele. At 7:26, Bumpy Johnson walked through the restaurant entrance. The maitre d', a thin white man named Robert Sterling, rushed forward. His face went pale. "Sir, I'm afraid. Table for 13, please." Sterling's voice came out as a squeak. "Sir, we don't." "You don't what? Have a table? I can see 4 empty tables from where I'm standing." Sterling looked around desperately. The restaurant was 3/4 full. About 60 white diners, all of whom had stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped everything, just staring at the 13 black men standing in the entrance. "Sir, this is a private establishment, and actually, it's a public accommodation. A restaurant open to the public. And I'm a member of the public with money to spend. Now, are you going to seat us, or should I ask the management?" Sterling's hands were shaking. Let me get the manager." Sterling practically ran toward the back office. Bumpy and his crew stood in the entrance, not moving, not speaking, just existing in a space where they weren't supposed to exist. And that existence was an act of defiance. The restaurant manager arrived within 2 minutes. His name was Edward Harrison, 51 years old, managing restaurants at the Plaza for 23 years. He'd dealt with difficult situations before. Drunk guests, celebrities making demands, political disagreements. But nothing like this. Harrison approached with his most professional smile. "Gentlemen, I understand there's been some confusion." Bumpy's voice was calm. "No confusion. We'd like to be seated for dinner." Harrison maintained his smile. "I'm afraid all our tables are reserved for the evening." Bumpy gestured to the empty tables visible throughout the restaurant. "Those 4 tables look unreserved to me." Harrison's smile tightened. "Those are being held for regular guests. Then we'll wait. I'm sure one of those regular guests will give up their reservation for us. Or we can take one of the tables that's currently unoccupied." Harrison dropped the smile. "Sir, I'm going to be very clear. This establishment has certain standards, certain expectations, and we reserve the right to refuse service." Bumpy nodded slowly. "On what grounds?" Harrison hesitated. He couldn't say it. Couldn't say the quiet part out loud. Not with all these witnesses. Not with his own staff watching. Not with the risk that someone might report it. So he went with something else. "Your party doesn't have a reservation." Bumpy pulled out his wallet. Slowly, deliberately, he counted out $200 in cash, placed it on the maitre d's podium. "This should cover a reservation, and a generous gratuity for your staff." The cash sat there, more money than most of the waiters made in 2 weeks. Harrison stared at it, then at Bumpy, then at the money. He was trapped. If he took the money, he'd have to seat them. If he refused the money, he'd have to explain why $200 wasn't good enough. And the only explanation was the one he couldn't say out loud. Harrison made his decision. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Or what?" or I'll call the police." Bumpy smiled. "Go ahead." Harrison went to his office, picked up the phone, dialed the 17th precinct. "This is Edward Harrison, manager of the Plaza restaurant. I need police assistance immediately." The desk sergeant's voice was bored. "What's the nature of the complaint?" "We have 13 individuals who are refusing to leave the premises." "Are they threatening anyone?" "No." "Damaging property?" "No." "Causing a disturbance?" "They're standing in my restaurant entrance." "Sir, if they're not breaking any laws, they're trespassing. If I ask them to leave and they refuse, that's trespassing." The sergeant sighed. "We'll send a unit." Within 7 minutes, 6 police officers arrived at the plaza, led by Sergeant Patrick Sullivan, 41 years old, 18 years with the NYPD. Sullivan walked into the restaurant and immediately understood the situation. He'd dealt with situations like this before. Black citizens trying to access white spaces. Usually it was simple. The cops told them to leave. They left. Case closed. But this was different. This was the Plaza Hotel. This was a public space. And these weren't just any black men. Sullivan recognized Bumpy Johnson immediately. Everyone in the NYPD knew who Bumpy Johnson was. The man who ran Harlem's numbers. The man who had a deal with Lucky Luciano. The man who had survived the Dutch Schultz War. And most importantly, the man who paid off certain cops and politicians to keep his operation running smoothly. Sullivan approached carefully. "Mr. Johnson." He kept his voice neutral, respectful even. "Sergeant Sullivan, good to see you." Sullivan glanced at Harrison, then back at Bumpy. "Sir, I understand there's been a request for you to leave the premises." Bumpy nodded. "Mr. Harrison has asked us to leave, but we haven't broken any laws. We're simply requesting service at a public restaurant." Sullivan knew the law. He knew that in 1948 restaurants could refuse service. But he also knew that this was a powder keg. 13 black men, 6 white cops, a room full of white witnesses, and Bumpy Johnson at the center of it all. One wrong move, and this became an incident. An incident that would be in the papers. An incident that would raise questions. An incident that might lead to investigations. "Mr. Johnson, this is private property. If the management asks you to leave, you need to comply." Bumpy's voice remained calm. "Sergeant, is there a law that says I can't eat here?" Sullivan hesitated. "Not exactly." "Then what law am I breaking?" "Trespassing." Bumpy gestured to the other diners who were now openly staring. "Are they trespassing?" "They were invited." "And why wasn't I invited?" Sullivan had no answer, because the truth was obvious to everyone in the room. Bumpy Johnson wasn't invited because he was black, and Sullivan couldn't say that. Not out loud. Not in front of all these witnesses. For 3 minutes nobody moved. The 6 police officers stood near the entrance. Bumpy and his 12 companions stood by the maitre d's podium. Harrison and Sterling stood behind their staff. And 60 white diners sat at their tables watching history unfold. Then something unexpected happened. A woman stood up from her table. She was 73 years old, white, wearing an expensive dress and pearls. Her name was Eleanor Hamilton, widow of a former New York State senator who had died in 1946. "Excuse me." Everyone turned. Mrs. Hamilton walked slowly to the center of the restaurant. Her voice was clear and strong. "I have been dining at this establishment for 41 years. Since 1907, when this hotel first opened. I have watched this restaurant serve presidents and princes and plutocrats. And now I am watching 6 police officers try to remove 13 gentlemen whose only crime is wanting to eat dinner." She looked at Manager Harrison. "Shame on you." She looked at Sergeant Sullivan. "And shame on you." Then she turned to Bumpy. "Sir, I don't know your name, but I want you to know that not all white people in this city are cowards. Some of us believe in what this country is supposed to stand for." She walked to an empty table near the center of the dining room, pulled out a chair, and gestured to Bumpy. "Please, sit." The room was absolutely silent. Manager Harrison started to speak. "Mrs. Hamilton, I am a paying guest at this hotel. I have a reservation, and I am inviting these gentlemen to share my table. Now, are you going to serve us, or are you going to call more police?" Harrison looked at Sergeant Sullivan. Sullivan looked at his officers. The officers looked at each other. They were all thinking the same thing. This has gone too far. This has become too public. This needs to end. and the only way to end it without making it worse was to let them sit down. Sullivan made the decision. Mr. Harrison, seat them. Harrison's face turned red. Sergeant, I don't take orders from. You're not taking orders. You're avoiding a public incident. Because if you force me to arrest these men, I'll have to charge them with something. And the only charge that applies is trespassing. But they're standing in a public restaurant. They haven't touched anything. They haven't threatened anyone. They're just standing there. So, if I arrest them, the papers are going to ask why. And when they ask why, the only answer is going to be that the Plaza Hotel doesn't serve black customers. Is it the headline you want? Harrison's hands were shaking. He looked at Bumpy, at Mrs. Hamilton, at the 6 cops, at the 60 witnesses, and he realized he'd lost. Fine, seat them. But they order and they leave. No lingering. Bumpy nodded. Of course. We wouldn't want to overstay our welcome. At 7:34, precisely 8 minutes after Bumpy Johnson walked into the Plaza restaurant, Robert Sterling led 13 black men to a cluster of tables in the center of the dining room, where everyone could see them. Bumpy sat at the main table with Junie Bird, Nat Pettigrew, and Sonny Chance. The other 9 men took the surrounding tables. Mrs. Eleanor Hamilton sat at her own table nearby, watching, bearing witness. The waiters brought menus. Their hands were shaking. They'd never served black customers before. Didn't know how to act. Didn't know what to say. One waiter, a young man named Thomas Murphy, approached Bumpy's table. His voice was barely above a whisper. Sir, may I take your order? Bumpy smiled. He looked at the menu, took his time, ignored the stares from every table around him. I'll have the filet mignon, medium rare, with the roasted potatoes, and bring us a bottle of your best wine. Murphy wrote it down. Yes, sir. The other men ordered. Expensive items. The best food on the menu. This wasn't about saving money. This was about proving they belonged. The food arrived 30 minutes later. Perfectly prepared. Beautifully presented. The same quality that the Plaza served to all its white guests. Because once they decided to serve these men, they couldn't serve them poorly. Not in front of all these witnesses. Bumpy and his crew ate slowly. Deliberately. They were in no rush. They talked quietly among themselves, laughed occasionally, acted exactly like the wealthy diners at every other table. And gradually something strange happened. After the first 15 minutes, people stopped staring. Conversations resumed at other tables. The clinking of silverware returned. The restaurant went back to being a restaurant, because it turned out that black men eating dinner looked exactly like white men eating dinner. There was no threat. No danger, no disruption of the social order. Just men sitting at tables, eating food, living their lives. At 9:11, Bumpy Johnson asked for the check. The total came to $247, more than most Harlem families earned in a month. Bumpy paid in cash, added a $50 tip, the largest tip any Plaza waiter had received that week. Then he and his 12 companions stood up, put on their hats, and walked toward the exit. Manager Harrison watched them go. His face was red, his jaw tight. He'd been humiliated, forced to serve people he didn't want to serve, in front of his staff, in front of his guests, in front of the police. As Bumpy passed Harrison's station, he stopped. Mr. Harrison, thank you for your hospitality. I'll look forward to dining here again. Harrison didn't respond, just watched his 13 black men walk through his restaurant, through the lobby, past the marble columns, out the revolving doors, and disappeared into 4 black Cadillacs. Sergeant Sullivan stood near the entrance. He'd waited to make sure there were no incidents. When Bumpy walked past, Sullivan spoke quietly. Mr. Johnson, what you did tonight. Bumpy stopped. Yes. Sullivan hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing. Have a good evening. Bumpy smiled. You too, Sergeant. As the Cadillacs pulled away from the Plaza Hotel, the doorman, Thomas McCarthy, turned to his colleague. Another doorman named James Kelly. Did that just happen? Kelly nodded slowly. I think we just watched history. McCarthy looked at the grand entrance of the Plaza, at the wealthy white guests walking in and out, at the world that had just changed in a small but significant way. History, he muttered, or the beginning of trouble. October 16th, 1948, the day after Bumpy's dinner at the Plaza. The Amsterdam News, Harlem's premier black newspaper, ran a front-page story. Bumpy Johnson integrates the Plaza Hotel. They called it the first time in the Plaza's 41-year history that black patrons had been served in the main dining room. The story spread. The Pittsburgh Courier picked it up. The Baltimore Afro-American. The Chicago Defender. Within a week, black newspapers across the country were reporting the story. And white New Yorkers started asking questions. If Bumpy Johnson could eat at the Plaza, why couldn't other black people? The Plaza Hotel received hundreds of letters. Some angry, some supportive, all demanding clarification of their policy. On October 23rd, exactly 1 week after Bumpy's dinner, the Plaza made an announcement. The Plaza Hotel welcomes all well-dressed, well-mannered patrons regardless of race. It was a carefully worded statement. Well-dressed, well-mannered. Code words for saying they'd still turn away black people they deemed undesirable. But it was something. It was progress. And other high-end restaurants noticed. The 21 Club changed their policy. Delmonico's followed. The Russian Tea Room. One by one, New York's exclusive restaurants realized that integration was coming whether they liked it or not. Because Bumpy Johnson had shown them that refusing service created more problems than accepting it. The police involvement, the witnesses, the newspaper coverage, the public embarrassment. It was easier to just serve the food. For years later, 1952, the New York State Legislature took up the question of expanding the Ives-Quinn Act. Should it cover public accommodations? Should it force restaurants and hotels to serve everyone? The debate was fierce. Restaurant owners argued for their right to refuse service. They claimed property rights, freedom of association, the right to run their businesses as they saw fit. But civil rights activists had ammunition now. They had examples. They had documentation. They had stories of discrimination. And they had the Bumpy Johnson incident at the Plaza. Assemblyman William T. Andrews, a black legislator from Harlem, spoke on the floor of the state assembly. He held up a newspaper clipping. In 1948, a group of Negro men walked into the Plaza Hotel. The management called the police. For 8 minutes, these men stood in that restaurant, not breaking any laws, not causing any harm, just wanted to eat dinner. He paused. The management eventually served them because they realized the alternative was public humiliation. But here's my question. Why should black citizens have to go through that? Why should we have to stand and wait and argue just to eat a meal? Why shouldn't the law protect us? Andrews looked around the chamber. The Ives-Quinn Act of 1945 was revolutionary. It protected us in employment, but it left us vulnerable everywhere else. In restaurants, in hotels, in theaters, in every public space where white owners could say you don't belong here. He held up the clipping again. This incident at the Plaza proved something important. It proved that integration doesn't destroy businesses. It doesn't harm white people. It doesn't disrupt society. It just means treating everyone with basic human dignity. The amendment passed. In 1952, New York State expanded the Ives-Quinn Act to cover public accommodations. Hotels, restaurants, theaters, any place open to the public. Discrimination became illegal. And legislators specifically cited examples like the Plaza Hotel incident as evidence that integration was both necessary and achievable. But there was a cost to what Bumpy did. 3 days after his dinner at the Plaza, vandals spray-painted racist slurs on his apartment building. Mamie received threatening phone calls. Anonymous voices telling her to tell your husband to stay in Harlem where he belongs. 2 of the men who'd gone with Bumpy to the Plaza lost their jobs. White employers found excuses to fire them. One was told his position had been eliminated. The other was accused of theft and dismissed without evidence. And the NYPD started watching Bumpy more closely, looking for any reason to arrest him, any violation they could use to put him in jail. Captain James Donnelly of the 32nd Precinct made it his mission to take Bumpy down. He assigned officers to follow Bumpy, to document his movements, to build a case. Standing up came with consequences. Progress required sacrifice. Bumpy knew that. That's why he brought 12 men with him to the Plaza. To share the risk. To share the burden. To make sure that if something went wrong, he wouldn't face it alone. Eleanor Hamilton became an unexpected hero in Harlem. The white woman who stood up at the Plaza. Who invited Bumpy to sit. Who shamed the management and the police. The Amsterdam News interviewed her 2 weeks after the incident. Mrs. Hamilton, why did you do it? Eleanor sat in her Upper East Side apartment, surrounded by photos of her late husband, a man who had fought for civil rights legislation in the state Senate, because it was wrong. Simple as that. I watched those policemen try to remove those gentlemen for the crime of wanting dinner. And I thought about my husband, about what he would do. She paused. My husband spent 30 years fighting for justice, for equality, for the principle that all men are created equal. How could I sit there and watch injustice happen right in front of me? Weren't you afraid? Of what? I'm 73 years old. I'm a wealthy white woman. What are they going to do to me? Arrest me? Eleanor laughed. The worst they could do was refuse to serve me. And if they did that, I'd go somewhere else. I have that privilege. But Mr. Johnson and his friends? They don't have that privilege. So I use mine. The story about Eleanor Hamilton spread. She received hate mail. Her country club membership was revoked. Some of her society friends stopped calling. But she also received letters of support from civil rights organizations, from churches, from ordinary black New Yorkers thanking her for her courage. Eleanor Hamilton died in 1955. At her funeral, there was an unexpected mourner. Bumpy Johnson, standing in the back of the church, wearing his gray suit, black fedora. When the service ended, he walked up to the casket, placed a single white rose, and left without saying a word. Because some debts can't be repaid, only honored. The Plaza incident didn't just affect New York. The story spread across the country. Black newspapers picked it up. Black readers saw what happened, and they got ideas. In Philadelphia, a group of black doctors walked into the Bellevue Stratford Hotel and demanded service. They were served. In Chicago, a black lawyer sat down at the Drake Hotel restaurant. He was served. In Boston, in Detroit, in Los Angeles. One by one, the barriers started to crack. Not because of new laws yet, but because people saw what Bumpy Johnson did and thought if he can do it, so can I. Courage is contagious. Direct action inspires more direct action. And sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to show others that standing up is possible. 1966, 2 years before Bumpy died, a journalist from Ebony magazine interviewed him about his life. They talked about many things. The Dutch-Schultz War, the Lucky Luciano deal, Alcatraz. But the journalist also asked about the Plaza. Mr. Johnson, looking back at your life, what moment are you most proud of? Bumpy thought for a long time. The Plaza. That dinner in 1948. The journalist seemed surprised. Not your business success. Not surviving the Schultz War. Not your deal with Luciano. Those were survival. That was business. This is Harlem, and I protected it. But the Plaza? That was about something bigger. What? Showing people, black people, especially, that we don't have to accept how things are. That we can walk into spaces where we're not wanted and demand to be seen. The journalist made notes. But you were taking a huge risk. Bumpy nodded. Of course. That's what change requires. Risk. Sacrifice. Standing in a place where you're not welcome and refusing to leave. That's power. That's real power. Not money. Not guns. Not connections. But the power to look someone in the eye and say, I belong here. That's what I showed people that night. That's why I'm proud of it. Today, the Plaza Hotel is a New York landmark. Tourists from around the world eat at its restaurants. And they have no idea that in 1948, black Americans were turned away at the door. They don't know about Bumpy Johnson standing in that restaurant for 8 minutes. They don't know about Eleanor Hamilton inviting him to sit. They don't know about Sergeant Sullivan making a choice that went against everything he'd been taught. But those 8 minutes mattered. Because in 1952, when New York State expanded its anti-discrimination law, the Plaza incident was cited as evidence that segregation could end peacefully. Because in the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act was being debated, Northern segregation was no longer invisible. Because Bumpy Johnson proved something important: you don't have to be a saint to demand basic human dignity. You can be complicated, flawed, a criminal even, but you still deserve to eat dinner. That's the legacy. 8 minutes. 1 restaurant. 13 black men. 1 white woman. 6 cops. And suddenly New York City was never quite the same. If this story showed you the power of standing your ground, hit that like button. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Would you have had the courage to walk into the plaza with Bumpy? To stand there for 8 minutes while everyone stared? Remember, courage is contagious. Direct action inspires more direct action. And sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to show others that standing up is possible. That's what Bumpy Johnson did on October 15th, 1948. And that's why we remember.